A river flows in total darkness right underneath a bustling metropolis, while millions walk over it daily without knowing. It was buried on purpose, and the reason behind it is darker than you think. The river fleet once ran cold and clear, carving a valley from the heights of Hampstead Heath down to the Thames. To the Romans, this tidal inlet, called Fleot, formed the natural western boundary of Londinium. It was a bustling highway where cargo ships sailed inland to unload goods at Holborn. For centuries, Londoners drank from its springs and built wells like St. Bride's along its banks. The river acted as an engine. Its current-powered watermills that ground grain drove early workshops and sustained the medieval markets crowding its shores. Early settlements grew with the water, not against it. But a river that feeds a city eventually chokes on it. By the mid-14th century, the fleet's banks were packed with tanneries and slaughterhouses. Animal blood, toxic dyes, and raw sewage poured directly into the slow-moving current. The water turned black. The very channel that made London's expansion possible was now a rancid, disease-ridden trench, threatening the survival of everyone nearby. The summer of 1858 brought a heat wave that pushed London to its absolute limit. The River Thames, bloated with decades of industrial waste and human excrement, began to bake under the relentless sun. The result was a sensory catastrophe known as the Great Stink. A thick, toxic miasma settled over the city. The air grew heavy, humid, and so intensely foul that newspapers described it as a monstrous heap of fermenting filth. Along the riverbanks, the water was no longer liquid. A crust of solid waste and sawdust floated on the surface, so dense that witnesses claimed a person could almost walk across it. Inside the newly rebuilt Houses of Parliament, sitting directly on the riverfront, the stench became a political emergency. Sweat-drenched lawmakers choked on the fumes. In a desperate bid to mask the odor, workers soaked the massive library curtains in chloride of lime. It did nothing. The chemical scent only mixed with the rot, forcing politicians to flee the chambers or face physical collapse. But the true horror lay beneath the smell. This rancid water was also the city's primary source of drinking water. For decades, water companies pumped this exact liquid directly into public wells. The result was swift and deadly: cholera. The waterborne bacteria swept through crowded slums, causing agonizing deaths within hours. Thousands perished in recurring waves, with a single outbreak in Broad Street claiming over 600 lives in just 10 days. London was trapped in a lethal cycle of its own making. To survive, the empire's capital would have to do something unthinkable: re-engineer the earth beneath its streets. The Metropolitan Board of Works appointed Joseph Bazalgette as chief engineer to solve the crisis. Bazalgette designed a system of colossal scale: 6 massive underground interceptor sewers running parallel to the Thames. These arterial tunnels caught the waste before it reached the river, carrying it far downstream. Constructing this network required a revolution in materials. Over 9 years, workers laid 318 million Portland cement bricks. Bazalgette chose this specific cement because it possessed a distinct property. It hardened underwater, securing the tunnels against the constant flow. By encasing London's tributaries in brick and concrete, engineers turned open, toxic waterways into hidden channels. The system worked. As the interceptor lines opened, cholera cases plummeted. The outbreaks that had devastated London for decades ceased, framing the burial of the rivers not as a defeat, but as a victory of science and municipal control. It was a triumph of engineering that saved the city, though it quietly set a costly precedent for the future. Closing a stone lid over a river does not make it disappear. Today, those rivers are ghosts, still carving their way through the concrete foundations of the modern world. A popular rumor claims the River Fleet flows directly beneath Buckingham Palace, but street-level mapping reveals a different story. The Fleet actually runs far to the east, terminating at Blackfriars Bridge. It is the River Tyburn that creeps beneath the palace grounds, a silent neighbor to the royal family. Across the Atlantic, Toronto shows how far this subterranean erasure could go. Beneath the glittering towers of the Canadian metropolis lies a hidden maze of lost waterways like Garrison Creek, Taddle Creek, and Russell Creek. Engineers buried over 10 named streams, leaving a staggering 3,400 miles of brick-lined storm sewers and drains. It is a massive, invisible plumbing system that swallowed entire natural valleys. Back in London, the physical shape of the surface city still bends to the water below. At King's Cross Station, built over the Fleet's old crossing at Battle Bridge, the street-level architecture curves. The rounded facades of the buildings were shaped specifically to align with the sweeping valley of the buried Fleet. Yet, enclosing a river in brick creates a volatile neighbor. In 1931, the Fleet revolted. Torrential rain sent a surge of stormwater through the subterranean tunnel, bursting the brickwork and completely flooding King's Cross Station. The river proved that while it can be hidden, it cannot be controlled. The concrete age went too far. What began as an emergency response to cholera became a template for urban progress, forcing dynamic natural systems into rigid underground pipes. This aggressive subterranean push solved the immediate sanitary crises of the 19th century, but it left modern cities with a massive ecological bill. When a river is buried, its entire ecosystem dies. Natural channels that once absorbed rainfall are replaced by paved surfaces, speeding up runoff and compounding the risk of flash flooding. Beneath the streets, these hidden torrents constantly conflict with a growing maze of modern utilities, from fiber optic lines to gas mains. On the surface, the loss of these waterways deprives cities of natural air conditioning, leaving behind hotter concrete corridors and barren public spaces. By erasing these lifelines to build roads, urban planners traded long-term climate resilience for short-term convenience. In 2003, Seoul decided to pull down a 4-mile concrete overpass that carried 170,000 cars every day. Beneath the roaring traffic lay the Cheonggyecheon, a historic stream buried since the 1970s. This was not a project driven by nostalgia, but a calculated test of urban survival. Engineers dismantled the road and uncovered 5.8 kilometers of the lost waterway. The results were immediate and measurable. The concrete heat island cracked. Temperatures along the restored corridor dropped by up to 5 degrees Celsius as cool air began to circulate through the city center. Winds swept down the newly opened channel, and air pollution plummeted by 10%. Wildlife returned almost instantly. Within a few years, species variety along the stream surged by over 600%, bringing birds, fish, and insects back to a once sterile concrete canyon. Property values within 50 meters of the water jumped by up to 50%. This massive reversal proved that daylighting is not a decorative luxury, and it is a functional upgrade. Now, other global cities are looking at their own underground networks, realizing that burying their past was a temporary fix. The rivers we hid to save our cities might now be the very things we need to protect them. Which buried river in your city should be brought back to light? Bake and flood. We realize we never conquered these waters, we only hid them. Now, resurrecting them is no longer about aesthetics, but urban survival. Which buried river in your city should be brought back to light? Let me know in the comments below.